We spent a little bit of time the last 2 weeks explaining that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and at least from our perspective, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. Let's put this on do not disturb here. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, that everything in this world is in all worlds. And we explain this with regards to concepts and ideas like Or and Choshech, light and darkness, that there's physical photons and illumination and emotional lightness and spiritual enlightenment, that the concept of light goes all the way top to bottom. Hashem creates the physical world, that's called Aretz, and Shemaim is the non-physical world, which is everything above it, meaning everything that filters into it, everything that is beyond the physical world. We've also pointed out that a human being exists in all of these worlds, that we as people exist simultaneously in all worlds, and that everything that exists in this world also has a spiritual source from which it draws, which is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. So Hashem creates Or on the first day of creation. Hashem creates light, and that light filters down. The Kabbalistic and Hasidic word that's used is the Hishtalshlus, which the best translation would be sense that then we experience in our world as photons. That's in the physical world. In every step above that, it means something else, but it's the same thing. It just depends on what we refer to as Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. Mr. President, what we refer to as Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. And I gave this example to a couple of my Talmidim a little bit earlier today, some of my students in the high school. And it's a good mashal for what we're discussing here. Everything that exists only makes sense in context of Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. So if I ask you the question, we'll get the man a cup. There we go. To eat. What's the answer? Depends on what?
What food or when?
But that comes after the answer yes. The answer is yes, and then you have to define.
Well, no. So hold on.
So
it depends on Olam, Shana, and Nefesh, right? If I say is it permissible for me to eat these crackers? So it depends. What does it depend on? Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. Who I am, where I am, and when I am. So, for example, on Yom Kippur, can I eat the crackers?
Depends.
I mean, were it to be Pikuach Nefesh, yes, right? On Pesach, am I allowed to eat the crackers? Right, for Pikuach Nefesh. But it depends on Olam, Shana, Nefesh, meaning person, place, and space.
When does place come into play?
So place is important. Place is exceedingly important. For example, in the world of Kodshim, this is classic. In the world of Kodshim, in the world of Korbanos, there's certain Korbanos that can only be eaten in Yerushalayim. Right? You can't eat it here. Or, for example, Trumas and Maestros, the tithes that you take for the Kohen and the Levi. So it's only forbidden to eat grain without taking tithes if you live in Israel. Meaning that's where that halacha applies. Certain halachas apply to people, certain halachas apply to situations, to places, and certain halachas apply to every situation. So if somebody, it's why questions of well, hold up. Who are you? When are you talking about? And where are you talking about? Olam, Shana, and Nefesh are all deeply embedded in everything that we're talking about. Now, that's true in physical halachic questioning, but it's also true in terms of emotional questions and intellectual questions and spiritual questions. Is that it depends on the who, the where, and the when of where a person is, when a person is, and who a person is. So, for example, you have certain areas of Kedusha that apply to time, like Shabbos. Shabbos is a high level of Kedusha than the rest of the week. You have certain people that have a higher level of Kedusha. For example, a Kohen has a high level of Kedusha. A Kohen Gadol has an even higher level of Kedusha. And certain places, the Beis Hamikdash has a higher level of Kedusha. Inside of the Beis Hamikdash, you have a high level of Kedusha in the Beis Hamikdash, and even higher level of Kedusha in the Kodesh HaKadosh. So it depends on Olam Shanei Nefesh, the person, the place, and the time, in order to define what the halacha is. And the same thing is true in every world that we are talking about. So schar, reward in this world, is the same thing as schar in the next world. It just depends on where you are. It depends. In this world, the highest level of reward that a person gets is X. When you experience that in another world, that's translated into something else. And it is possible for a person to downgrade their schar. Somebody that doesn't appreciate, this is the mashal we gave last week, somebody that doesn't appreciate spiritual enlightenment, or somebody that doesn't appreciate emotional lightness or intellectual enlightenment, the only thing that they can experience of light is light. That's what they have. A baby, when they're born, can experience light and dark. They cannot experience intellectual enlightenment. They're just not developed enough for that. A child at the age of 5 can understand the sweetness of candy, but they can't experience the sweetness that comes from winning an award. Like, winning a Fields Medal in mathematics is so sweet. But it's different sweet to the sweetness of honey. Or when somebody does a favor for you, you say, wow, that was so sweet of you. That means sweet. It's a translation of the concept of sweetness to an emotional relationship.
It's also a lack of really having the proper terminology or language to describe.
Correct, because our language, by definition, is a mashal. The language that we use is definitionally a exploration from this world that we then apply to other spheres. Now, the Ramban points out that is true by all other languages. By Lashon HaKodesh, it's the other way around. Says the Ramban, that's why Lashon HaKodesh is called Lashon HaKodesh. Because in Lashon Kodesh, in the transcendent language, quite literally, it starts from above to below. First, it was light in the most elevated possible connotation, and then it becomes physical light.
Pardon my ignorance because I'm joining this midstream.
Sure.
I just want to make sure. Lashon Kodesh is
Hebrew. The Hebrew language.
Okay,
Yes.
I wasn't sure if we're talking about like God's divine.
That
speech.
is God's divine speech.
Okay, so
But it's not modern Hebrew.
What are you saying?
Well,
It's not.
That's
it's
what I
aspects of
wanted
modern
to-
Hebrew.
That's what I wanted to ask. Is it Hebrew that which we speak, or is this getting a little bit more abstract, or just I want to understand?
Meaning the language of the Chumash. Lashon Kodesh, Hashem creates the world through those utterances. This is what the pasuk describes, B'dvar Hashem Shamayim Na'asu, that the heavens are created with the word of Hashem,
and the word was in Hebrew.
and the word is Hebrew. Meaning, the way that the Balatanya describes it is that the thought of Hashem is contained in those letters, and those letters express His will. From there comes creation. That's how the Balatanya explains
It's a
it.
lot what's in the Sefer Yetzirah.
Yes.
as well, right?
Now, that's all meaning basic diagram of all of the levels of everything is I am a body, but I'm also a soul, and that soul that I have illuminates my body. My soul, by the way, also has a soul. And my soul also has a soul, meaning that the more abstract you get, the more pristine, so to speak, one translates those thoughts. So there's me in the bodily form. There is me in the abstract form, which is me, my personality, that which gives me life, which animates me. But then there's a me that's deeper than that. And then there's a me that's even deeper than that, and a me that's even deeper than that. Until the point that the only possible expression that one can say of me is, I'm an expression of the will of God, which is a very lofty, elevated sense of self. Meaning there's me, which is my body, and me, which is my life force within my body. And then there's the me, which is my skills and capacities. And then there's the me, which is my aspirations. And then there's the me, which is beyond my aspirations to my deepest desires.
How many levels are there? 49?
So,
Or is it infinite?
so the way that the Medrash describes it, Medrash Rabbah in Maseches, in Sefer Bereshis, and you see this in a number of Masechtas and Shas and throughout the Zohar Kodesh, and all the Kitzur Arizal, is that there are 5 levels of the soul. It's a little bit what we mentioned last week. There's Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. And we'll describe what these things are very briefly, and then we'll talk about how this relates to HaKadosh Baruch Hu being in all worlds from an important introduction to the Maharal. Maharal and Gvuras Hashem. The Nefesh HaChaim explains that if you were to take everything that is in my brain, meaning information and who I am, download a photocopy of me, right? Meaning download the data of who I am. That's called nefesh. Nefesh is the thing that animates the body. That's called the nefesh. Ruach is beyond what I am. It's my capacities, my skills. So, for example, speech is in the world of Ruach. It's a capacity. It's a possibility. It's something that I can do. Neshama is aspirational. It is that which I yearn for and dream for. But it's not who I am currently. It's what I want to become. And that practically, I want my nefesh to become my neshama. Meaning, my neshama is my dreams and aspirations, which is very deeply me, that informs my skills of the things that I can do in the world. And my nefesh is the snapshot of me. That's who I am. That's nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Now, we'll just point out in the Hebrew language, things are a little bit interesting here. You say in the morning davening, Elokai neshama shenasata bi taharahi. Hashem, the neshama that you put in me is tahara. You don't say the ruach that you put in me is tahara. What does that mean? Neshama, the soul, the neshama part of my soul, is tahara, is pure. Can a soul become impure?
Doesn't seem.
So no, the neshama is not impure.
It's nothing physical happening.
Well, non-physical things can become impure as well, sure. And
Such as.
for example, we refer to in the psukim as the ruach hatuma.
But that's the actual tumah might be termed a ruach.
No, ruach hatuma is not the same thing as tuma in a halachic sense. You have tuma, which is halachic tuma. Tuma, which is impurity that is contracted through 2 major places that tuma can come from. There's tuma that comes from outside and tuma that comes from inside, which is called tuma haba alav mibachutz, tuma that comes to you from the outside of you, and tuma hayotz alav migufa, tuma that comes from inside of you, impurities that come from inside of you. How do you have impurities that come from inside of you? So impurities that come from inside of a person are zav, nida, yeladis, and balkari. For example, woman has a baby, that introduces that to yeladis, that introduces a certain sense of impurity. A man, after having relations has a impurity that's called tumas keri, and a person needs to go to the mikveh to remove that. That is halachic tumah, physical tumah. There's also tumah haba'alav mibachutz, tumah that comes to you from outside. The tumah that comes to you from outside is, for example, coming in contact with the dead body. That's called tumas meis. Now, I actually mentioned this, I think, in the article this past Shabbos. The Sod Yisrael Ishvitz, the third Ishvitz Rebbe points out that ruach hatuma is the emotional experience of coming in contact with halachic impurity. What happens to a person when they come in contact with death? So it affects their emotions. That's called ruach hatuma. It exists in the world of capacities. It exists in the world of emotions.
Specifically negative ones?
No, because you can also have ruach hakodesh.
No, I mean, Ruach HaTumah would be specifically negative.
Negative emotions, yeah. And you can have ruach hakodesh. Ruach hakodesh means capacities in kedusha that are expanded, that are elevated. You can have ruach that's tameh, ruach that meaning in your world of not who you are, that's nefesh. Nefesh can become tameh as well. Who I am can become tameh. Physically and also non-physically, a person can encounter tumah and absorb that to the point that it becomes who they are. A person can absorb kedusha to the point that that is who they are. They are subsumed in kedusha. But the experience of coming in contact with tumah makes a person sad. And you know those mornings that you wake up, you just can't do anything. It's not who you are. Just you feel it. You feel I can't. Like I'm not going to be able to do anything today. I don't feel good. I don't feel good. I'm not feeling sick. Physically, I feel fine. But emotionally, my capacities, I feel constrained. I feel limited. And then you have certain days that you wake up in the morning, you feel amazing. You feel light. You feel capable. You feel like you're on top of the world. Now, do those things biologically correlate to certain chemicals in your brain? Yes. But that's not how we experience them. We don't feel like, dopamine and serotonin coursing through the, we don't feel synapses firing. What we feel is ruach. We understand that there's a ruach, there's a feeling that either enhances our capacities or downgrades our capacities. You can have somebody that has tremendous strength today, they're just not feeling it. They're just not. So ruach can be very deeply affected by the emotional world around us, by the experiential world around us. Yeah, you really said.
So someone can become tumah and not aware of it. For example,
if
he walks under a tree and there's it's a kohen, there's a body there, he doesn't know it. Do you have to be aware in order to have ruach hatumah manifest itself?
So strictly speaking, no. The Sefer HaChinuch writes that while it is not obvious, there are certain bali nefesh, there's certain people that are of great stature that will be able to notice how this affects them. But most people are not sensitive enough to notice that it's affecting, but it does. For example, they've done studies now on seasonal depression, right? You don't realize when you live, I don't know, in Manchester, that after 8 months of never seeing the sun and seeing rain every single day, it does something to you emotionally, right?
Yeah, that
It has to do with light.
Right?
It has to do with light.
Maybe, right? But you don't necessarily have to have realized that you've come in contact. It doesn't even have to be conscious. Says the Sefer HaChinuch, but it does affect you. Tumah does affect you. And there are those people that understand that there's certain things that we're just not capable of doing in a state of tumah. And therefore, especially by the Mekubalim and Hasidim, they go to the mikveh all the time. Because even if there's no perceivable effect, we understand that there is an effect, that these things do affect us.
Going to the mikveh doesn't help Tumas Mace. And
It doesn't help Tumas Mace, but it helps all the other
we
Tumas.
most likely are all.
We're all Tamei Mace, that's
Right,
true.
So
The Chidar writes about the Arizal. The Chidar writes that he says it's nowhere in any of the Kisari, and it's nowhere in any of the Sarm that were passed on by Reb Chaim Vital. He says, but it's clear to him, says the Chidar, that the Arizal must have had Gilui. Well, we know that the Arizal had Gilui Eliyahu, that Eliyahu Navi came to the Arizal. He says, and he must have come not just in Ruchnius, but he also must have come in Gashmius, not just spiritually, he also must have come physically, because Eliyahu is a Kohen. The Gemara says, Pinchas Eliyahu, that Pinchas is Eliyahu. He says, and he must have had access to the Efer Para Aduma, to the ashes of the Para Aduma, the red heifer, because without that, it's impossible that the Arizal would have had the hasagas, the understandings that he had in the secrets of the Torah. It's impossible for a person to have achieved those thoughts without being totally tahar, without being completely pure. He says it must be that the Arizal had Efer Para Aduma from Eliyahu. He says otherwise it would have been impossible for him to have understood the things that he understood and to be able to transmit in the way that he did. Yeah.
It reminds me of a lot of different points. I mean, and maybe this is the underlying premise of all of those things. But for instance, when we talk about how Paro's heart was hardened by Hashem, that it was like the ruach, not ruach, what is the term you just used? Tumah. But it was that it just overcame him.
Yeah, to a certain extent, yes. And that's how the Sforno explains
out of nowhere, it doesn't make sense. His heart was hardened. It also reminds me of, I don't know if you've heard, I don't know how much truth there is to it. Maybe it's Kabbalah, maybe it was Pirkei Avos, but there was a thing that I heard, remember in Yeshiva, where someone said the concept of shadim is not some kind of demonic horned things walking around. It's almost like this thing that it says, don't walk by yourself in the dark at night. Why? Because shadim will overtake you. And what will they do? They're not going to possess you and make your head spin round and whatever. They will make you angry. They will make you upset. They will almost, and that's what it reminded me of. It's almost like just out of nowhere, you're overcome with grief or sorrow. You start thinking about terrible things. So you're 100% right. I think we learned this a few years back. See if I have it here. Yeah. This Yaakov HaKolel, this is the Yaakov line of Ishbitz, the second Ishbitzer Rebbe. So since we're speaking about Ishbitz, the Ishbitzer points this out. We're getting close to the Yom Kippur. It's good to mention this. The Ishbitzer points this out in Erev Yom HaKippurim, in the first piece, if I remember correctly, where he talks about the Seir LaAzazel, the scapegoat, literally, that you chuck off the cliff, that goes to Azazel. The Gemara says in Maseches Yuma, there's different opinions what it means LaAzazel. The Gemara says Lechaper al Maaseh Uzzah va'Azazel, to atone for the sin, for the act of Uzzah and Azazel. Who's Uzzah and Azazel? The fallen angels, right? These fallen angels. Who are the fallen angels? Says the Ishbitzer, he says, these are the same angels that the Medrash explains and the Zohar explains in Bereshis, that when Hashem said, Na'aseh Adam, let us create man. So there were angels that said, Ma enesh ki tizkarenu ben Adam. Yeah, I mean, why should we have these people? Why should we have people? And they had a whole conversation, and then they got chucked down. There's a lot to say about this. Midrashim, I think we spoke about some piece of that last Yeshav Shuvah. But what does it mean that there's these angels that said, like, let's not create people? So in this Ishbitzer says, Hinei zeh hakach tzofon b'leiv ha'adam shemekatreg al havayasah. Baked in to the existence of mankind is the voice in our heads that questions our own existence, that challenges our own existence. Meaning that part of the condition of being a human being is that part of ourselves that questions the validity of our own being here, that questions ourselves. And that is baked into the psyche, the psychology of every single person. He says, that's what Chazal are telling us. That Na'aseh Adam, when Hashem said, let us create man, he creates man with the question of should you be here? That's built in. And the averos that come from that question require work. And that's what the Seir La'azazel is about. So those demons, so to speak, those bad angels that question our existence, so where are they? They are in us and in the world and in every single human being. And they are an expression of the will of God for a human being to exist with a particular set of self-doubt built in. Right?
It's like that.
Say what?
The saboteurs is part of
100%.
psychology.
Within us.
Yeah.
Built into the existence of every single human being has to answer. Nobody is born with the clarity.
For the obviousness of meaning that women do for childbirth.
That's also true, but that's it's true. It's true within everything. No, it's true within everything. Is that every single human being has to ask themselves the question: why me? Why this? Why now? Why am I here? You have to ask that question, and that's part and parcel. And there are averos that stem from the question. There are deep averos that stem from that question. Sometimes it happens that a person is like, whatever, what difference does it make? And therefore, I'll do this thing that I shouldn't do.
Or you might make
Or
assumptions
I
that
won't
I'm here
do.
to do
Correct.
something
You'll do
that you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah. And that doubt, that's a demonic force within us that exists, that Hashem created, that you experience in your life, but it's something bigger than you, in the sense that it's not just you, it exists in the world as a whole. And when Chazal looked deeply into human beings, and this is the point that we said 2 weeks ago, when Chazal looked deeply into the human condition, they deconstructed all these various pieces of what a person is and saw how Hashem put us all together. Meaning, what's the math of how Hashem makes a person? It's this, yeah.
It also shows the fight against good against evil.
100%.
That's exactly what it is.
Baked into us.
This could be where Freud got half of his stuff from. I mean, it's
So
Is this one of the Yitzhar?
So this is a part of the Yetzirah, yeah. There are certain, Rabbi Shlomo Salanta makes the point that there are certain Yetzaras that, there's a lot more to say on this point, but I'll say this much, because people get this very wrong all the time. There are certain Yetzaras that need to be harnessed and channeled for good. And there are certain Yetzaras that need to be destroyed.
May I ask for an example?
I'll give you an example. Everybody is born with a desire to eat and to reproduce. Those are positive, negative, and neutral desires depending on person, space, and time. The vast majority of destruction that goes on in the world has to do with people wanting more and wanting pleasure. Those desires are not necessarily negative. When a person somebody sees, you walking down the street and somebody dropped the wallet and there's, $1,000 that falls out of the wallet and you want to pick it up and claim it for yourself, right? That's a normal desire for a person to have. But it's negative. But it's the same desire to go out and make a living and support your family. It just, don't take that person's money, it doesn't belong to you. That's no signal. Don't steal. Don't take that. That belongs to that guy.
good values take play in that also.
100%.
Well, specifically,
And if you weren't raised the right way, then the right way might be sure, hey, it's free, let's steal it.
Correct.
Who cares?
100%.
So
So-
it's a matter of upbringing also.
100%.
It's outside influence.
Yes.
Not just internal.
Yes.
So it may not, in many cases, it may not be the person's fault for not overcoming.
So that's true. but assuming a sense of values, everybody fights against whatever values they do have. There's Yetzer Hara no matter what. To the extent, by the way, I think we've made this point before, that in different contexts, is that you know with certainty that, how do you know with certainty that you're doing the wrong thing? There's no opposition internally to it. If there's zero opposition to it, you have no questions about it, it's for sure not the right thing. Because every value judgment, everything that you do that has some question of value, if you choose one of those sides and you feel no internal turmoil, maybe you should, like no, if you don't hear the angel on the other side, right, the devil on the other side, then for sure you're doing the wrong thing. If you don't, so I'll explain. If you see somebody drop $1,000, right? And there's a piece of you that says, yeah, I should take that, right? Mm-hmm. And you take that, and you don't feel a Yetzer Hara telling you not to do that. You don't feel a Yetzer Hara. You don't feel a Yetzer Hara.
Okay.
That's making you conflicted. If you feel conflicted and you feel conflicted to a higher value system, so then you know that you're doing the wrong thing.
Works the other
But
way too.
yes,
Your mind will say you have to return that person, then you're like, I just spent $1,000. Maybe I should put it in my pocket. Nobody would know.
correct. So that's the point. Is that when you put it in your pocket, and you walk away, not you, Khalid, right? When you put it in your pocket and you walk away, that's the easy decision, right? Life is easy when you're going downhill.
Oh, if you don't feel a sting.
Correct.
What you're doing.
Correct.
If you don't feel like you're compromised
That's-
in some way for practice.
That's
I feel guilty and I feel confident.
Right?
I was thinking about feeling conflicted morally,
No.
not practically. For
If
your own self.
if it feels me, but so I think I mentioned this once before that the Rambam writes at the end of Hilchos Malachim and Milcham Hashem. The Rambam mentions that he writes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu somehow or another has deigned it so that monotheism would be spread in the world through Christianity and Islam. This is Osa Ha'ish HaNatzri and the Russia, the Yishmaeli. That's like the Rambam doesn't pull punches. It says the Christians and the Muslims, they've spread monotheism because we didn't do the job that we were supposed to do in the world. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to spread monotheism in some other way. Rav asked the kasha on this. Remember Rabbi Rav and Kermi Avni asked the kasha. He said, I don't understand. How come Christianity and Islam are so successful and Judaism has such a hard time?
We don't have
Forced
missionaries.
conversion by the sword.
We don't have missionaries. Chabad is the closest thing to missionaries we have, and it's only for Jews. They ask me,
So-
You're not allowed
you don't have a
but-
face.
You're not allowed to give a practical political answer.
So so that's the goof. What's the neshama of it?
Kidding me? If Chabad set up a shop and gave out free hot dogs and hamburgers to everyone in America, everyone would be Jewish tomorrow.
So I'll tell you the secret, and that you'll understand why Christianity does what Christianity has done, and why Islam does what Islam has done.
Judaism's harder.
No, the Yetzer Hara works with them, not against them.
They're not going against it.
Right? There's a Yetzer Hara that says to a person that is trying to live according to Yiddish values, there's a challenge. You know why the Crusades were successful? Because the Pope stood up and said, everybody's fighting with each other. All you Christians, you're yelling and screaming. You're killing each other and taking each other's money, and you're all jealous of each other's stuff. I've got a great idea. Take all of that negative energy and go kill the Jews. It's a mitzvah.
Wasn't that against the Muslims?
Yeah, it was eventually against the Muslims. I mean, we're going to take... Right.
And also at the
We were
destination,
in the way.
40,000 Jews.
Is Islam like acceptable according to Judaism though? It's like fits within the Noahide like
In theory, in
structure?
practice, Islam has spread through murder for the last
Yeah,
you know,
we don't do that.
1,300 years.
So going back to my original point.
I mean, but what's the vote? Is that the Yetzer Hara works with it,
It's the forced conversion by sword is the Yetzer Hara.
right?
Okay.
But the point is that the the Yetzer Hara works. If the Yetzer Hara is working with you, you don't feel an opposition. You feel great.
It's like what you say about
You're
like,
caving to all of your worst tendencies and calling it religion. If religion doesn't give you angst, it's not reaching for something higher and beyond you, then all that it's doing is effectively baptizing, putting a hechsher on your worst traits and saying, this is now mutter. You took murder and rape.
Enabling the
Yeah,
bad things in the
100%.
All in the name of religion.
In the name of God. Murder in the name of God. The mamzerim, Rahman, the mamzerim from Hamas that murdered, pillaged, and raped and beheaded Jews on October 7th. They felt like religious heroes, calling their parents, look at what I'm doing. I'm saying, why were they so inspired? You look at me. I can take all of my worst negative tendencies and say that I'm religious. The Yetzer Hara is working with them. Right? You have a Yetzer Hara. They felt zero conflict with that. We have a very hard time. We have a very, very hard time being a moral army. Because when you are attempting to be a moral army, you're attempting to live up to a set of values.
Does that mean they've always been that way, though? Because if there was a time before they were that way, then when they became that way, there must have been a conflict.
So, yes and no. There's certain things that are internally deeply conflicting to a human being. In all societies, in contemporary society today, everywhere in the world, feels a sense of murder is wrong. So, but people have these deep, dark desires to do terrible things.
It's evil.
Right?
That's what he did.
But when you put a hechsher on it and say you can do it in the name of religion,
So how do you define Milchemes Mitzvah, which is also, looking at it from the outside, a bit brutal.
it is, by the way, 100%. And to that end,
And I don't know how we would handle something like that.
I'm sorry, what's the subject?
meaning Jews also have to go to war from time to time.
Yeah, perfect
But-
example is Purim.
So,
Where it was go have at it.
so it wasn't. No, that's a misnomer.
It's when
According-
they were coming on.
But you don't keep the spoils.
No,
Firstly, we didn't keep the spoils, and secondly, it was you only attack the people that are dangerous.
It was not imperial.
I don't remember that subtext.
So it's mafurish in the psukim, by the way. It's mafurish in the psukim. I was having this conversation with somebody a little while back, at the beginning of the war, Purim time, in the beginning. I don't know. It was a month before Purim. Where I made the observation that perhaps the greatest miracle of Purim is that Jews would give him permission to defend themselves. Meaning, if anybody rises up to kill you, you're allowed to go and kill them. Achashverosh said, "Go ahead." But it's worth pointing out that in the story of Purim, Achashverosh gave us permission to kill everybody. We didn't.
Defended ourselves.
Right? It's mafurish like this in the psukim. Where's
A
the
lot.
what?
Where does it clarify?
What was the number?
I'll show you. I'll show this to you. Hold on.
It says it in there. It was like 12,000 or something.
Yeah, no, I'll show you explicitly. Get a Megillah here. Where's my Tanakh?
Right
there. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah. The Navi says this explicitly. I mean, this is Mordechai in the Megillah. Meaning Mordechai was written by Baruch HaKodesh, but right. The pasuk says about this whole story. After Haman is killed, so Mordechai, so Achashverosh sends out to everybody. He says, "Asher nasan hamelach laYudim, asher b'chol ir ve'ir." He sends to Jews in every city, Likael, to gather, v'la'amad al nafsham, to defend themselves, and la'ashmid v'la'arog v'la'abed, to kill, to destroy, to obliterate. It's kol chel amu medina, all of the armies of all of the people, Hatzarim Asam, that are attacking them, Tafan Hashim, children and women, Ushlalal Mavos, and to steal their property, to take their spoils. What? Women and children, correct. That is what Achashverosh gives the Jewish people permission to do.
That's what he gets permission.
Correct. What do they do is not the same thing. What they do is
Every point when somebody brings up this question goes like, wow, so brutal.
So what happens? Nikalua Yehudim Ba'arim. This is actually what happens. Jews gathered in all their places, in all the cities and towns of Achashverosh, Nishloach Yad, to strike out b'mevakshei ra'asam, with the people that were trying to do bad to them. V'ish la'amad lifnehem, and nobody stood up against them, meaning to say you can't do this. Ki nafal pachdam al kol ha'amim, because everybody was terrified to say that they knew that they had permission to do this. And then the pasuk says, they killed the 10 sons of Haman, fine. And they never took the property. They never took the spoils. They said about how many people were killed in Shushan B'Yerav Melech. They said the number. What did they kill? 500 people, and the 10 sons of Haman. Meaning, they never took vengeance upon women and children. They only killed the people that were trying to attack them. And they didn't take spoils. Moral army. Achashverosh says, do whatever you want. They did not. They only killed the people that were trying to kill them. That's it.
I apologize for the digression, just related to that. From what I remember, when Midian attacked the Jews, or fought with the Jews in the Chumash, we were to wipe them out,
there are stories in the Chumash that we are instructed to kill men, women, and children.
Yeah.
There are such stories, practically speaking, since the days of Chumash. Maybe Yeshua, we have not had any instruction to do so. We pass on that there is no obligation to do so. There might have been at one point in time an obligation to do that, and an obligation to ensure that was taken care of, but not something that is part and parcel of the Jewish fundamental relationship.
The Navi, Hashem instructed the Navi to tell the Nesor that you have to kill everybody, not leave one.
Machshava Samalek was shown, right?
You have to destroy everybody.
Everybody.
We don't.
Maybe. Again, maybe. But the point is that you see throughout Tanakh that whenever Jews are instructed to kill people, they have a hard time with it. We don't want to. We're not trying to sanctify murder. They did, and there's a machlokas between the Rambam and the Ramban whether or not that was a good thing.
That's why they didn't really get a
Right, I'm saying so. There's machlokas Rambam and Ramban whether what they did was moral, whether what they did was correct. Machlokas Rambam and Ramban and how Yaakov responded to it, whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. These things are all. The Maharil is all discussion about this. Meaning we're conflicted about these things, and the conflict is the point of it, is that we are desperate to ensure that when we do things that are destructive, that we're not doing it in tandem with the Yetzer Hara. We don't want it to be feeding our negative impulses. It should be something that we feel uncomfortable with. I remember when I was in yeshiva, Blachman said to us once, he said, I would hope that if you were told that you have to kill an Amalekite baby, that you'd have a problem with that. And some wise guy in Shir was like, I'd be okay with it. And Blachman said, get out of my Shir, I never want to see you again. Yeah, how could it be that a Jew says that they want to kill a baby? You're out of your mind. We don't talk like that. Chas v'shalom. Meaning, were it to be that there's certain, like the Chazon Ish said Chazon Ish had a good joke. They asked him once, was Mishka Rav the Chazon? It was Chazon Ish. They asked the Chazon Ish, is there a mitzvah to vote in the Israeli elections? Is there a mitzvah to vote? He said, yes, it's a mitzvah to vote. But it's a mitzvah like maror, not like matzah,
So long as you're completely
right? Meaning it's a bitter one.
And
It's
yet,
bitter.
when whether it's soldiers or criminals or whatever, once they murder that first person and the second, and it just they become numb to it.
Correct.
It doesn't affect
So
them the
then-
same way. That first one is earth shattering.
Right.
But you actually change.
So this becomes
The doctor
teva sheni.
seeing blood, or
Yes, that becomes what's called teva sheni. That is when it becomes part of your nefesh. Right?
So you've transformed.
Meaning your nefesh is now a different nefesh. The nefesh can become tameh. But person has neutral nefesh that could go in either direction, but then the nefesh can become tameh. You do enough negative things. Yeah.
What we're talking about is a soldier doing it. Soldiers are killing people every day, not that they want to, but it does harden them.
Yes,
But they're still a hero at the same
100%.
As long as they don't go murdering people for
Because
fun,
they're moral.
they're fine.
And
But
and
they could be
it takes
easily harmed.
it takes a deep toll. It takes a deep toll on the nefesh of the people that do so.
And those that it
and-
doesn't, are they wrong? No.
No, no.
People that doesn't take it toll, like, I killed 5 people today and I'm happy about it.
No, it's
but-
like a professional hitman. You give him enough money, and he doesn't make a difference who he kills.
So the
It's
chap
on
is though
wonder if
the
you
chap
say
is
that.
though that and HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes a promise to us to a certain extent that we don't become harmed through the mitzvahs that we do, but you have to be very careful that when you fire that shot, that you're doing so because it's a mitzvah and not because it kind of feels good. And that's a very deep and very subtle avodah. That's not so simple for a person to achieve. Because you never want to become a person that it feels good to,
It's a good thought process to have. Do they teach that in the army, like when they go into war?
I think in the Hesder yeshivas they talk like this. I don't know if they talk like this big adol in the army, but Rav Kook speaks about this, that like you don't want to transform yourself into an animal. Meaning, we never celebrate that we have to do this. But we got into this because of the chiddush that Yisrael Salant points out, which is there's certain parts of us that require transformation. Meaning, certain yetzer that could be tov or ra, could be good or the opposite. And the job of a Baal Nefesh, of a person that's working on themselves, is to direct us into the proper place. The Yetzer for food and for sex and for love and for connection and could be things that are very positive or exploited and used very negatively. And then there are certain things that are fundamentally, patently evil. Those things we are not trying to translate into positive. Those things need to be squashed. And the line to figure out what's what is not always so easy. The pasuk says, "V'avarti ruach tuma min haaretz." The Rebbe Shalom says at the end of time, he's going to remove all the ruach hatuma min haaretz. He's going to take it away. He's going to remove all of that because there are certain things that are patently, fundamentally negative. They are negative. You can contend with them. You can fight with them. But if you try to inculcate them into you, that's not good. You're not supposed to transform that into good. You're supposed to stay far away from it.
What's an example?
Death. Death is bad. Death is a negative thing. Death is something that we contend with. At no point in time does Yiddishkeit ever say death is good. It's not good. It's a bad thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the source of all life. Makar HaChaim. It's the source of life. Death is bad.
This is making me think of Maurice Samuel's You Gentiles. Did you ever read that?
I don't think so.
It's interesting. It's from the 1920s. But he draws a dividing line between Jews and the entire rest of the world. But the way he frames it is the first part of the book is in terms of seriousness. that the Jew is separated from the rest of the world by a fundamental seriousness about life and what life is for, whereas the Gentile hypothetically approaches life in the manner of a sporting game. And so that's why the Jew and the Gentile are fundamentally incapable of understanding each other, because to the Gentile, something like honor could be something that you would die for, and to a Jew, that is so incomprehensibly unserious and childish that you would take this gift of life and throw it away, that you would participate in a duel.
Right.
To a Jew, hypothetically, the idea is if you're in a duel, what is the idea of honor in a duel? That you would let yourself die, be disadvantaged, so that you could die attractively because you upheld a rule to a game? Why would you throw your life away?
Bizarre.
That kind of thing, yeah.
I mean, and the flip side of that, by the way, is and that you would kill in order to preserve your own honor is also bizarre.
And you take life for what amounts to a social game,
Right.
and that you would allow your life to be taken and deny yourself the ability to preserve at all costs,
Correct.
to die attractively.
Right. So death is patently fundamentally evil. We avoid it at all costs. We want to live. But meaning, Pashtus is, and the Ramban points out ala Torah, is that death is, so to speak, a accident of failure. Ultimately, we are supposed to be b'chai le'olam. We should live forever. That's how Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be alive forever, to be plugged into the source of life forever. How that looks and what the world would look like is a great questions. Good, but life is positive and death is negative. I mean, the point is that we are attempting to prolong life as much as we possibly can and to conquer death. Eventually, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to remove death from the world. Not that he's going to make death into life. Death is not going to become life. Death is going to end. And because death is evil. We're not trying to, and all the things that surround it, all the tumah that comes from it, all the negativity that spawns from this terribly heartbreaking, heart-wrenching separation between body and soul, that will end.
Wouldn't you say appreciation is a good thing that comes from?
So that is something that we can understand as part of our role in the world today where death exists.
Where could appreciation possibly come from without the conflict, without the death?
It's a good question.
Appreciation is gone.
No, because appreciation is something that you can have without. Appreciation comes from the world of gratitude. And gratitude is infinite.
But you can't be grateful for something if you can no longer comprehend what life is like without it.
So
You
can.
become entitled. Like, what do you mean
So-
it's not around? It's always
So
there.
you can, in theory. Now's not the time for this, but this is Chazal make this point when the Gemara says that last love, the only, at least one version of understanding this, the last love in the future, the only korban that will bring is the korban toda, is the offering of gratitude. I mean, gratitude is infinite, sin is not. Because gratitude means I'm getting something even though I don't need it. You can be grateful for something even though you have everything. You can always have more because there is an infinity of possibility of growth.
So is it a valid claim that knowing that there's ultimately going to be death, that the person has a right to question what's the purpose of life?
Well, that's exactly this point, that we question it. That we question it. And that's part of who we are. And you have to overcome that.
That's Azazel.
That's Azaz, right? Uzay and Azal. That's how the Gemara says. Now, let's just contain everything that we've said here because we moved around a little bit, and this is all part of the same sugya here. As we pointed out that people exist in all worlds, Hashem exists in all worlds, and everything exists in all worlds. That I exist as me, as a body, but ultimately, in some way, shape, manner, or form, I exist in what's called the yechida of the soul, which is that part of myself, which is a direct expression of the will of God. That part of myself, the way that the Zohar and the Arizal explain it, is nefesh, ruach, and neshama are inside of me. Nefesh is me, ruach is my capacities, neshama is my aspirations. That's all inside of me. Chaya, which is called the neshama of the neshama, is that which is the life force within my desires, my deepest wants. And within that is the identity of the Ruach Elokim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu blows into the soul, blows the soul of man, Chelik Elokam Mimal, a piece of himself, that's called the Yechida. Those parts of myself are outside of me. They're, so to speak, surrounding me, but not part of me, because they're inaccessible to me. And we pointed out that the neshama, that part of myself that is aspirational, that part of myself that's yearning, wanting, it's not who I am yet, it's who I want to be. That's tahara, that's pure. And as far as I'm right, that when a person does an avera, and you'll understand what this means now, the neshama leaves them, flies away from them. What does that mean? So when a person does an avera, they lose in that moment the aspirational part of themselves. Because I want to become something, and it's definitely not this.
The neshama is pure.
Correct. That's why the neshama is pure. Meaning, the me of what I want to be, that aspirational part of myself, that part of me has no place in the world of averas.
I did hear a Dry Torah once that I remember they said that when you eat treif, it actually makes you want to do less mitzvah.
Right. Because you are now within yourself, you are absorbing something of negativity.
The whole context of the discussion was, do you eat pikuach nefesh? Should you eat? Why would you try to refrain from eating non-kosher,
Right.
even if it's to save your life?
Right.
If it's okay to eat it when you can save your life, then really, what is so bad about it? Because it actually hurts your neshama.
Right. This is the Gemara in the beginning of the 8th parak of Masechus Yoma, that we pass on like the sheet of Rabbi Yochanan, that treif is like poison for your neshama, meaning poison for a Jewish body, in the sense that it is antithetical to the aspirational self. It's not who you want to be. It's not a reflection of the will of Hashem that is accessible to you aspirationally.
Does that hold true for someone who grew up not being kosher and then now changes? Does that go away, or does that?
So yes and no, in the sense that, for sure, that does affect them, but it doesn't affect them nearly as much as if they did so consciously and knowingly, because then a person that ate treif with their guf, their body, right? But they weren't cognizant of it, so their ruach wasn't involved in that, right? Because it wasn't their capacity. Meaning, I didn't make a decision here. I ate this. I didn't know. It's why it's much easier if you didn't know what the problem was to become a Baal Tshuva. If you didn't know, much easier to stop eating treif, because that was only something that you did. It wasn't part of who you were. It was a very external part of yourself, as opposed to the guy that grows up, eating bedatz eid charedis and goes off the derech. Now he's eating chaza. All of a sudden he's he's fressing on pig because that's decisions. It affects him in a far deeper way, because much more of him is involved in that avera. There's much more of that guy that's in the avera. And he's chased away his aspirational self. He doesn't want to become that. There's a lot more decisions that go into that. He's utilized his body and his capacities and his thought process, all for these things. Right? That's affecting nefesh, ruach, and the neshama he doesn't want anymore. And now's not the time to discuss it, but this is also a little bit of what the Gemara says in the Masechus Beitza, that on Shabbos you have a neshama yisera. A neshama yisera. Rashi there says, Beitza daf zayin, daf ches, that on Shabbos you have a neshama yisera. Rashi says, Eichel v'sheisev ve'enei katz, that you eat and drink and you're not disgusted by it. What does that mean? It means that sometimes a person eats and they feel that this activity is antithetical to their spiritual self, that there is a gap between my spiritual needs and my physical needs. I'm forced to eat, but if I was more of an elevated human being, I would stay away from this. On Shabbos, those two things merge because you eat in the context of a mitzvah. So this eating is not the same as eating pizza on a Tuesday night. The eating that you have on Shabbos is something that is involving all parts of yourself. It's a conscious spiritual experience. It's the opposite of the guy intentionally eating chas v'shmaltz. I'm involving all parts of myself in this experience. So that's neshama yisera. You have a heightened awareness of your aspirational self to the point that even the mundanities of consuming calories is elevated. Even sleep is elevated. That every part of myself is elevated. It is living in a pristine way of existence where everything that I do is meaningful to my eventual growth, as opposed to, I got to get this done. It's like when you eat lunch at your desk, you're only eating with your goof, right?
Yeah.
It's just, I got to get it in. When you sit at a Shabbos table and you sing the Zmiris and you're saying Divrei Torah, it's a totally different experience. Much more of you is consciously aware and aspirationally, spiritually involved in this consumption of calories. It's a different you. It's not the same thing. Now, on a physical level, it might be identical. But every other part of you is turned on in a totally different way here. So it affects you very differently. Because you can eat on multiple levels. Now, we didn't even get to the conversation which we wanted to have this week on how HaKadosh Baruch Hu exists in all worlds, in multiple levels. Hashem is Baruch. We'll take care of that next week.
Hi, Rabbi. Took us on too many things.
No, tangents are good.
Can you go
But
get
that